They whispered about the cleaning lady who wore Hermès scarves beneath her uniform, thinking it was some cheap imitation she'd picked up from a street vendor. What they didn't know was that beneath those rubber gloves lay hands that had once signed billion-dollar acquisition deals, and behind those tired eyes was a mind that had built one of Europe's most successful luxury conglomerates before losing it all in a single, devastating betrayal. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Meridian Fashion House's flagship Manhattan store, casting long shadows across the pristine marble floors that Elena Marchetti was methodically mopping. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. At 42, she moved with a quiet grace that seemed oddly out of place for someone in a janitor's uniform. Her auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail that couldn't quite hide the elegant bone structure that had once graced the covers of European business magazines. Her movements were efficient, almost choreographed, as if she were conducting an orchestra rather than pushing a mop bucket across expensive flooring. The early morning shift at Meridian was Elena's sanctuary, the 2 hours before the store opened, when she could work in relative peace without enduring the pitying glances of customers or the barely concealed disdain of the sales staff. She preferred the solitude, the rhythm of cleaning that allowed her mind to wander back to better times, while her hands performed the menial tasks that now constituted her livelihood. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was cleaning the very type of luxury retail establishment she had once owned dozens of, back when her name had meant something in the fashion world. Elena paused near the display window featuring Meridian's latest collection, studying the craftsmanship with the practiced eye of someone who understood quality construction and design aesthetics. The garments were well made, she had to admit, though overpriced for what they offered. She could see the manufacturing shortcuts hidden beneath the elegant presentation, the cost-cutting measures that maximized profit margins while maintaining the illusion of premium luxury. It was the kind of analysis that came naturally to her, muscle memory from years of building and running her own fashion empire before it all came crashing down. The sound of heels on marble announced the early arrival of someone from management. Unusual for 7 in the morning when the store wouldn't open for another 3 hours. Elena continued her work, making herself as invisible as possible while keeping her ears attuned to the conversation echoing through the empty retail space. She had learned that invisible people heard everything, and information was the one currency she could still collect even in her reduced circumstances. The numbers from the Milan store, unacceptable, a crisp female voice was saying, the tone carrying the particular brand of authority that came with corner offices and executive parking spaces. Elena recognized the voice as belonging to Victoria Sterling, Meridian's chief executive officer, a woman in her early 50s who had built her career on aggressive expansion and ruthless cost management. Sterling had a reputation for cutting expenses without regard for the human cost, the kind of executive who viewed employees as line items on a spreadsheet rather than actual people with lives and families. The overhead in that location is killing our margins, came the response from what sounded like a male executive, his voice carrying the nervous undertone of someone delivering bad news to a superior known for shooting messengers. We're looking at a complete restructuring of the European operations, which means significant staff reductions across all locations. Elena absorbed this information while continuing to clean, her trained business mind automatically calculating the implications of what she was hearing. Meridian was struggling more than their public financial reports indicated, facing the kind of fundamental challenges that suggested deeper structural problems rather than temporary market fluctuations. The company was caught in the classic luxury retail trap of trying to maintain premium pricing while competing against fast fashion and changing consumer preferences. What about the acquisition rumors? Sterling's voice carried a sharp edge that suggested she was dealing with pressure from multiple directions. I keep hearing whispers about some Middle Eastern investment group sniffing around luxury fashion. Brands. The last thing we need is some oil money trying to buy up American retail institutions. Elena's hands stilled on the mop handle for just a moment as memories flooded back. Middle Eastern investors had been the ones who ultimately destroyed her own fashion empire, though through betrayal rather than acquisition. The parallels were uncomfortable, stirring emotions she had worked hard to suppress during the 3 years since her professional downfall. Nothing concrete, the male voice replied. Just market speculation and rumors. Though I did hear that Al Rashid Holdings has been making inquiries about several luxury brands. They have the capital to make serious offers if they decide to move. Al Rashid Holdings. Elena knew that name, though she kept her expression carefully neutral as she continued cleaning. Sheikh Khalid al-Rashid was something of a legend in international business circles, a man who had transformed inherited oil wealth into a diversified global empire spanning real estate, technology, and luxury goods. His acquisition strategy was known for being both generous and transformative, often revitalizing struggling companies through massive capital investment and strategic restructuring. "Get me everything you can find on Al Rashid Holdings," Sterling commanded. "If they're looking at luxury retail, I want to know their strategy, their timeline, and their target criteria. We need to be prepared for whatever they might be planning." Elena filed this information away as she moved her cleaning cart toward the back of the store, away from the continuing executive conversation. Her former business instincts were still sharp enough to recognize opportunity when it presented itself, even if she was no longer in a position to act on such opportunities directly. The irony of her situation wasn't lost on her. She possessed more strategic business knowledge than most of Meridian's executive team, but she was invisible to them except as someone who emptied their trash cans and cleaned their windows. The back offices of Meridian Fashion House were a maze of cubicles and conference rooms that reflected the company's focus on efficiency over aesthetics. Unlike the carefully designed retail space, the administrative areas were purely functional, filled with the kind of generic office furniture and harsh fluorescent lighting that suggested budget constraints and practical priorities. Elena had cleaned these offices hundreds of times over the past 18 months, long enough to become part of the background scenery that employees noticed only when something was out of place. She began her routine in the accounting department, where the aftermath of late-night work sessions was evident in overflowing trash cans and coffee-stained desks. The financial stress at Meridian was visible in these details: longer working hours, more urgent deadlines, and the kind of pressure cooker atmosphere that Elena remembered from her own company's final months. Numbers didn't lie, and the evidence scattered across these desks told a story of a company fighting for survival despite its public facade of success. While emptying the trash from the chief financial officer's office, Elena couldn't help but notice the financial projections spread across the desk. Her trained eye immediately picked out the concerning trends: declining same-store sales, increasing inventory costs, and debt service payments that were consuming an unsustainable percentage of revenue. Meridian was in far worse shape then. She had realized, operating on borrowed time and borrowed money with limited options for recovery. The sound of approaching footsteps interrupted her analysis, and Elena quickly returned to her cleaning routine as someone entered the office area. She recognized the newcomer as James Patterson, Meridian's head of human resources, a thin man in his 40s who had the perpetually harried look of someone dealing with constant crisis management. Patterson was one of the few executives who occasionally acknowledged Elena's existence with a polite nod, though he had never actually spoken to her directly. "Elena, right?" Patterson's voice startled her, as it was the first time in 18 months that anyone from management had addressed her by name. She looked up from the trash can she was emptying, noting the unusual stress lines around his eyes and the way his usually perfect tie was slightly askew. "Yes, sir," she replied carefully. maintaining the deferential tone that was expected from cleaning staff while studying his expression for clues about why he was suddenly interested in speaking with her. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. You've been working here for what, about a year and a half? Patterson consulted a tablet he was carrying, scrolling through what appeared to be employee records. Always punctual, never any complaints, good performance reviews from the night. Supervisor. Elena nodded, unsure where this conversation was heading, but maintaining her carefully cultivated image of a reliable but unremarkable employee. She had learned that invisibility was her best protection in this environment, allowing her to observe and understand without attracting the kind of attention that might lead to uncomfortable questions about her background. I'm going to be direct with you, Patterson continued, his voice dropping to a more confidential tone. The company is going through some significant changes, and we're having to make some difficult decisions about staffing levels. Your position isn't in immediate danger, but I wanted you to know that we might be reducing the cleaning staff over the next few months. The news wasn't entirely surprising, given what Elena had overheard about Meridian's financial difficulties, but it still represented a potential disruption to the stable, if modest, life she had built over the past 3 years. Losing this job would mean starting over again, finding new employment with a resume that had an unexplainable 3-year gap in references that couldn't be verified without revealing her true identity. I understand, sir, Elena replied, keeping her voice steady despite the uncertainty his words created. Is there anything I can do to improve my chances of remaining on the team? Patterson studied her face with the kind of attention that made Elena slightly uncomfortable, as if he were seeing her clearly for the first time rather than as just another service employee. His expression suggested he was processing something that didn't quite fit his expectations, though she couldn't determine what might have caught his attention. Actually, there might be, he said slowly. We're looking for someone to help with some special projects, tasks that require discretion and attention to detail. The position would involve more responsibility and better pay, but it would also mean working more closely with senior management. Would you be interested in something like that? Elena felt a surge of conflicting emotions, excitement at the possibility of more engaging work, anxiety about increased visibility that might threaten her carefully maintained anonymity, and curiosity about what kind of special projects Meridian might need help with. Her business instincts told her this could be an opportunity to gain access to information and influence that might prove valuable, but her survival instincts warned against anything that might expose her true background. What kind of special projects? She asked carefully, trying to gauge how much Patterson knew or suspected about her capabilities. Confidential research, document preparation, maybe some analysis work, Patterson replied, his tone suggesting he was being deliberately vague. The kind of tasks that require someone who can be trusted with sensitive information and who won't ask too many questions about why the work needs to be done. Elena recognized the careful language of someone offering employment that existed in the gray areas of corporate structure. This wasn't about official job descriptions or standard human resources procedures. This was about finding someone who can handle tasks that needed to remain unofficial and untraceable. Her years in business had taught her to recognize such opportunities, and her current circumstances made her more willing to consider arrangements that she would have rejected when she had other options. I would be interested in learning more, she said, choosing her words carefully to express willingness without appearing too eager or qualified. When would you need an answer? Soon, Patterson replied, checking his watch and gathering his tablet. I'll have more details in a day or two. In the meantime, keep doing what you're doing, and remember that discretion is the most important qualification for this kind of work. As Patterson left the office area, Elena returned to her cleaning routine while processing the implications of their conversation. The offer represented both opportunity and risk, a chance to engage her business skills and gain access to insider information, but also increased exposure that might threaten the anonymity that had protected her for the past 3 years. She needed to understand more about what Meridian was planning and why they needed someone with her particular combination of capabilities and desperation. The rest of her shift passed in routine tasks, but Elena's mind was focused on the strategic implications of everything she had learned that morning. Meridian was facing a crisis that threatened its survival. Middle Eastern investors were circling the luxury retail sector, and management was looking for someone to handle sensitive projects that required both competence and discretion. The convergence of these factors suggested that significant changes were coming, and her position at the intersection of information and invisibility might prove more valuable than anyone realized. By the time Elena finished her cleaning duties and prepared to leave Meridian Fashion House, she had made a preliminary decision about Patterson's offer. The opportunity to regain some measure of professional engagement was too valuable to ignore, even with the associated risks. Her business instincts, dormant for 3 years but still sharp, were telling her that Meridian's crisis might create exactly the kind of chaos that allowed someone with her skills to find opportunities for advancement. The subway ride back to her modest apartment in Queens gave Elena time to reflect on how dramatically her life had changed since the collapse of her fashion empire. 3 years ago, she had been Elena Marchetti, CEO and founder of Marchetti International, a luxury fashion conglomerate that operated boutiques and manufacturing facilities across 12 countries. Her personal net worth had exceeded $200 million, and her business decisions had affected thousands of employees and suppliers around the world. The betrayal that destroyed everything had come from the person she trusted most, her business partner and former lover, Marcus Donovan, who had spent 2 years systematically undermining her authority, while secretly negotiating to sell the company to a Middle Eastern investment group without her knowledge or consent. By the time she discovered his deception, Marcus had already transferred key assets and secured voting control of the board of directors, leaving her powerless to prevent the hostile takeover that stripped away everything she had built. The legal battles that followed had consumed her remaining resources and reputation, leaving her with nothing but the clothes on her back and a new understanding of how quickly success could transform into complete failure. The business media that had once celebrated her achievements turned against her with vicious efficiency, portraying her as an incompetent executive who had lost control of her own company through poor judgment and emotional decision-making. Elena had chosen to disappear rather than continue fighting a battle she couldn't win, assuming a new identity and taking whatever work she could find to survive. The past 3 years had been a masterclass in humility and adaptation, teaching her to find satisfaction in simple accomplishments and to value the kind of honest work that she had previously taken for granted. Cleaning offices wasn't glamorous, but it was honest labor that allowed her to maintain her dignity while she figured out what came next. Her apartment was a studio in a pre-war building that had seen better decades, furnished with items from thrift stores and estate sales that reflected both her reduced circumstances and her still refined taste. Elena had learned to find beauty in simplicity, to create elegance with limited resources, and to appreciate the freedom that came with having nothing left to lose. The space was small but comfortable, a sanctuary where she could drop the carefully maintained facade of the invisible cleaning lady and remember who she used to be. That evening, Elena sat at her small dining table with a cup of tea and her laptop, conducting the kind of research that had once been routine, but now felt like returning to a familiar but distant skill. She began with Al Rashid Holdings, diving deep into their acquisition history and investment strategy to understand what their interest in luxury fashion might mean for companies like Meridian. Sheikh Khalid al-Rashid emerged from her research as a fascinating figure, a man who had inherited substantial wealth but had multiplied it through strategic vision and careful execution. Unlike many inheritors of oil fortunes, he had diversified his investments early and aggressively, building a global empire that spanned multiple industries and geographic regions. His approach to acquisitions was known for being both generous and transformative, often providing struggling companies with the capital and expertise needed to reach their full potential. More importantly for Elena's current situation, Al Rashid Holdings had a track record of retaining and promoting talented executives from acquired companies, recognizing that human capital was often more valuable than financial assets. This suggested that if Al Rashid was indeed interested in Meridian, the acquisition might create opportunities for advancement that wouldn't exist under the current management structure. Elena's research into Meridian's financial situation confirmed her earlier assessment. The company was in serious trouble, with declining revenues, increasing costs, and debt obligations that severely limited their strategic options. The luxury retail sector was undergoing fundamental changes that favored companies with deep pockets and global reach, exactly the kind of resources that Al Rashid Holdings could provide. As she compiled her analysis, Elena felt the familiar thrill of strategic thinking that had driven her success in building Marchetti International. Her mind was automatically identifying opportunities, assessing risks, and developing scenarios that could maximize value for all stakeholders. The intellectual engagement was intoxicating after 3 years of mental stagnation, reminding her of capabilities that she had almost forgotten she possessed. The next morning brought a phone call from James Patterson requesting that Elena come to his office before her regular shift to discuss the special project opportunity in more detail. His voice carried an urgency that suggested events were moving faster than originally anticipated, and Elena felt the familiar acceleration that preceded major business developments. She arrived at Meridian Fashion House an hour early, using her employee access card to enter through the service entrance, and making her way to Patterson's office while the building was still largely empty. The early morning quiet gave the executive floors an almost ominous atmosphere, as if the building itself was holding its breath in anticipation of significant changes. Patterson was waiting in his office with a woman Elena didn't recognize, someone whose expensive suit and confident bearing clearly marked her as senior management from outside Meridian's usual hierarchy. The stranger was perhaps 50 years old, with silver hair styled in a severe bob and the kind of direct gaze that suggested experience in high-stakes negotiations. "Elena, thank you for coming in early," Patterson said, his tone more formal than their previous conversation had suggested. "I'd like you to meet Catherine Walsh, who represents certain interests that may become relevant to Meridian's future operations." Walsh studied Elena with the kind of professional assessment that made it clear this wasn't a casual introduction. Her expression suggested she was evaluating qualifications and capabilities rather than simply making polite conversation. And Elena felt the uncomfortable sensation of being analyzed by someone who knew far more about the situation than she did. "Ms. Marchetti," Walsh said, using Elena's real surname for the first time in 3 years, and sending a shock of recognition through her carefully maintained composure. "Yes, we know who you are. The question is whether you're ready to be that person again." Elena felt the walls of her carefully constructed anonymity crumbling around her, but also experienced a surge of relief at no longer having to maintain the pretense of being someone she wasn't. The game had clearly changed, and her true identity was now part of whatever strategy was being implemented. "I'm not sure what you mean," Elena replied carefully, though her tone carried the authority that came naturally when she wasn't pretending to be subservient. "Elena Marchetti died 3 years ago in a boardroom in Milan." "Did she?" Walsh asked, opening a tablet and scrolling through what appeared to be extensive research materials. "Because Elena Marchetti built one of Europe's most successful luxury fashion conglomerates before being betrayed by someone she trusted. Elena Marchetti understood market dynamics, supply chain management, and strategic positioning better than most Harvard MBAs. Elena Marchetti had exactly the kind of experience and expertise that might prove valuable in the right circumstances. Patterson was watching this exchange with the fascination of someone witnessing a transformation he had suspected but never confirmed. Elena could see recognition dawning in his expression as her carefully maintained facade dissolved to reveal the executive she had once been. "What circumstances?" Elena asked, abandoning any pretense of being the humble cleaning lady and allowing her natural command presence to emerge. "And who exactly do you represent, Ms. Walsh?" Walsh smiled for the first time, an expression that suggested she had been waiting for exactly this question. "I represent interests that are prepared to offer you the opportunity to reclaim not just your professional identity, but your life's work. Interests that believe talent and experience are more valuable than temporary setbacks or public relations." Problems. Elena felt a surge of possibilities opening before her, but also the wariness that came from having been betrayed by people she had trusted completely. The offer was too good to be true, which meant there were complications and costs that hadn't been revealed yet. "I'm listening," she said, settling into the kind of negotiating posture that had served her well during her years building Marchetti International. "But I'll need to understand exactly what you're proposing and what you expect in return." Walsh nodded approvingly, recognizing the emergence of the executive she had come to recruit. "Sheikh Khalid al-Rashid is prepared to make you an offer that will allow you to rebuild everything you lost. But first, we need your help with a small matter of competitive intelligence." Elena understood immediately. Al-Rashid was planning to acquire Meridian Fashion House, and they wanted inside information that would give them advantages in negotiation and post-acquisition planning. Her position as an invisible employee with access to confidential information made her uniquely valuable for such purposes. "What kind of intelligence?" she asked, though she already suspected the answer. "The kind that only someone with your background and current access could provide," Walsh replied. "Financial records, strategic plans, executive communications, supplier relationships, everything that would allow a potential acquirer to understand the true value and condition of the target company." Elena realized she was being offered the opportunity to participate in the acquisition of the company where she currently worked as a cleaning lady, providing insider information that would facilitate her own transformation from invisible employee to strategic consultant. The irony was breathtaking, but the potential for professional resurrection was undeniable. "And after the acquisition?" Elena asked, understanding that her value would extend far beyond the intelligence-gathering phase. "After the acquisition, Sheikh al-Rashid would be very interested in retaining the services of someone with your experience in luxury fashion retail," Walsh replied. "Someone who understands both the operational challenges and the strategic opportunities in this sector." Elena felt the pieces of a complex puzzle falling into place around her. Al-Rashid wasn't just acquiring Meridian Fashion House. He was acquiring Elena Marchetti's expertise and experience as part of the package. Her 3 years of exile were ending not with gradual rehabilitation, but with immediate restoration to executive authority under new ownership. The offer represented everything she had lost and more, but Elena's hard-won experience with betrayal made her cautious about accepting anything that seemed too generous. She needed to understand the full scope of what was being proposed and what obligations would come with al-Rashid's patronage. "I need time to consider this," she said, though her instincts were already telling her that this was the opportunity she had been waiting for without realizing it. "And I need to understand more about Sheikh al-Rashid's expectations and timeline." Walsh consulted her tablet again, bringing up what appeared to be detailed project timelines and milestone schedules. The initial intelligence gathering phase would need to be completed within 2 weeks, coinciding with certain market conditions that will optimize the acquisition strategy. After that, The timeline depends on regulatory approvals and due diligence processes that could take several months. What guarantees do I have? Elena asked, her negotiating instincts fully engaged despite the emotional appeal of the offer. How do I know this isn't another setup designed to exploit my desperation? Patterson had remained silent during most of this exchange, but now he leaned forward with an expression that suggested he had more information than he had initially revealed. Elena, Sheikh al-Rashid specifically requested you for this project. He's been tracking your situation for the past year, waiting for the right opportunity to approach you. Elena felt a chill of recognition mixed with curiosity. Someone with al-Rashid's resources and connections had been monitoring her situation, which meant her anonymity had been more illusion than reality. But it also meant that her reputation and capabilities were still valued in circles that mattered, despite 3 years of professional exile. Why me specifically? She asked, though she suspected the answer involved more than just her experience with luxury fashion retail. Walsh's smile carried implications that extended beyond simple business transactions. Because Sheikh al-Rashid believes in second chances, and because he has a particular interest in correcting certain injustices that have affected talented people in the fashion industry. Elena realized that al-Rashid's interest in her situation might be personal as well as professional. The wealthy and powerful often developed interests in helping others who had been wronged, particularly when such assistance also served their business objectives. Her story of betrayal and exile could appeal to someone who valued loyalty and competence over political considerations. I'll need to meet with Sheikh al-Rashid directly before making any commitments, Elena said, establishing the kind of executive-level negotiating stance that hadn't been possible during her 3 years of survival mode employment. If he wants my cooperation and expertise, he can afford me the courtesy of a face-to-face discussion. Walsh nodded as if she had expected exactly this response. That can be arranged. Sheikh al-Rashid is currently in New York on other business matters, and he would be pleased to meet with you at your convenience. Elena felt the momentum of major change building around her, the kind of acceleration that preceded fundamental transformations in both business and personal circumstances. The offer represented not just professional rehabilitation, but the opportunity to reclaim the life and identity that had been stolen from her through betrayal and deception. As she prepared to leave Patterson's office and return to what might be her final shift as a cleaning lady, Elena reflected on the strange turns that life could take. 3 years ago, she had been at the top of the fashion industry, respected and successful beyond most people's dreams. 6 months ago, she had been invisible and forgotten, cleaning offices and emptying trash cans while trying to find meaning in honest but menial work. Now, she was being offered the chance to return to executive authority under the patronage of one of the world's most successful investors. The opportunity was exactly what she had dreamed of during her darkest moments. But Elena's experience with betrayal made her cautious about accepting anything that seemed too good to be true. The Sheikh Khalid al-Rashid meeting would determine whether this was genuine opportunity or elaborate deception. Elena's instincts told her it was legitimate, but her survival depended on verifying those instincts through careful evaluation of motives, capabilities, and long-term intentions. As she walked through the executive offices of Meridian Fashion House, Elena saw the environment with new eyes. These weren't the offices of her employers, they were the offices of a company that would soon belong to her patron, and she would help determine its future direction and success. The transformation from invisible cleaning lady to strategic consultant was about to become reality. But first, she needed to understand exactly what Sheikh al-Rashid expected in return for his generous offer of professional resurrection. Ritz-Carlton's penthouse suite overlooked Central Park with the kind of view that cost more per night than most people earned in a month. But Elena found herself studying the man seated across from her rather than admiring the scenery. Sheikh Khalid al-Rashid was younger than she had expected, perhaps 45, with intelligent dark eyes and the kind of understated elegance that came from generational wealth combined with personal discipline. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than her annual rent, but his manner was surprisingly informal as he poured tea from an ornate silver service. "Ms. Marchetti," he said, his accent carrying traces of Oxford education layered over Arabic inflections, "I appreciate you taking the time to meet with me on such short notice. I realize this situation must seem rather unusual from your perspective." Elena accepted the delicate porcelain cup, noting the quality of the tea service and the careful attention to hospitality details that suggested genuine respect rather than mere courtesy. Her years in international business had taught her to read cultural signals, and Al-Rashid's approach indicated someone who valued relationship building over immediate transaction completion. "Unusual is one way to describe it," Elena replied, maintaining the professional composure that had served her well during countless high-stakes negotiations. "Though I have to admit, after 3 years of cleaning offices, unusual isn't necessarily unwelcome." Al-Rashid smiled, an expression that transformed his serious features and revealed genuine warmth beneath the careful diplomatic facade. "Imagine not. Though I suspect those 3 years taught you things about business operations that most executives never learn, regardless of their educational credentials or corporate experience." Elena found herself appreciating his perspective, recognizing someone who understood that wisdom could come from unexpected sources and difficult experiences. Her time working in menial positions had indeed provided insights into organizational dynamics and employee relations that her previous executive experience had never revealed. It certainly provided a different perspective on corporate hierarchies and management effectiveness, she agreed, studying his reaction to gauge how much he truly understood about the lessons learned from professional exile. "When you're invisible to the decision-makers, you see things that might otherwise remain hidden." "Exactly." Al-Rashid leaned forward slightly, his expression becoming more focused. "Which brings us to why I wanted to meet with you personally, rather than conducting this discussion through intermediaries. What I'm proposing isn't simply a business transaction. It's a partnership based on mutual recognition of value and potential." Elena felt the familiar stirring of strategic excitement that had driven her success in building Marchetti International, but tempered it with the caution that came from having lost everything through misplaced trust. "Ms. Walsh mentioned intelligence gathering and post-acquisition consulting. This is a partnership agreement that would give you equity ownership in the luxury fashion division and guaranteed operational control for a minimum of 10 years. You wouldn't be an employee, you would be a partner with legal protections. That would prevent the kind of betrayal you experienced before." Elena accepted the document, scanning the key provisions with the legal literacy that came from years of reviewing complex business agreements. The terms were extraordinarily generous, providing her with both financial security and operational authority that would make her effectively immune to future betrayal. "This is more generous than what I had with Marchetti International," she observed, noting particularly favorable clauses regarding decision-making authority and profit sharing. "Why are you willing to offer such terms?" "Because I believe in aligning interests rather than creating dependency," Al-Rashid replied. "When partners have genuine ownership stakes and legal protections, they're motivated to create maximum value rather than simply follow instructions. Your success would directly contribute to my success, creating natural incentives for collaboration rather than competition." Elena found herself impressed by both the financial terms and the philosophical approach they represented. Al-Rashid's offer addressed her fundamental concern about vulnerability by creating a structure where betrayal would be economically irrational for all parties involved. "Assuming I agree to this partnership, what's the timeline for the Meridian acquisition?" she asked, her tone shifting toward practical implementation rather than theoretical discussion. Al-Rashid consulted his phone, bringing up what appeared to be detailed project schedules and milestone tracking applications. We need to complete the intelligence gathering phase within 2 weeks to capitalize on current market conditions and Meridian's financial distress. The formal acquisition process could take anywhere from 3 to 6 months, depending on regulatory approvals and due diligence complexity. Elena calculated the implications of this timeline, considering both the opportunities and challenges that such aggressive scheduling would create. 2 weeks isn't much time to gather comprehensive intelligence while maintaining my cover as a cleaning employee, which is why we're prepared to accelerate your transition, Al-Rashid replied, producing additional documents that appeared to be detailed operational plans. Tomorrow, you'll receive a promotion to executive assistant to the chief financial officer, a position that will provide you with legitimate access to the financial and strategic information we need. Elena stared at him in amazement, recognizing the sophisticated planning and resource coordination that such rapid organizational changes required. You've already arranged for my promotion? How is that possible? Al-Rashid's smile carried the quiet satisfaction of someone whose resources allowed for solutions that seemed impossible to others. Meridian's board of directors includes 2 members who have accepted consulting agreements with my investment group. Their influence was sufficient to create the executive assistant position and recommend you for immediate promotion based on your excellent performance reviews. Elena realized she was witnessing the exercise of power and influence on a scale that dwarfed anything she had achieved during her own business career. Al-Rashid's ability to manipulate corporate structure and personnel decisions from outside the organization demonstrated resources and connections that made him a formidable ally or opponent. What about my background check and employment verification? She asked, recognizing potential complications in her rapid promotion. My current identity won't withstand detailed scrutiny from human resources. Elena Marchetti died 3 years ago, Al-Rashid replied matter-of-factly. But Elena Morrison, with appropriate educational credentials and employment history, will prove perfectly qualified for an executive assistant position. The documentation will be comprehensive and completely verifiable. Elena understood that. He was offering her not just professional rehabilitation, but complete identity restoration with legal protections that would prevent future exposure or harassment. The resources required for such comprehensive identity management indicated capabilities that extended far beyond typical business operations. You're asking me to trust you with everything, she said, acknowledging the magnitude of what he was proposing. My professional future, my personal safety, my entire identity depends on your continued good faith and competence. Yes, Al-Rashid agreed without hesitation. Just as my investment in the luxury fashion sector and my reputation for successful partnerships depends on your competence and good faith. We're creating mutual dependency that makes betrayal irrational for both parties. Elena stood and walked to the windows again, but this time she was studying her reflection with new understanding rather than processing painful memories. The woman looking back at her was no longer the defeated exile who had been cleaning offices for 18 months, but the experienced executive who had built a fashion empire and was preparing to build another one. I need 24 hours to consider the full implications, she said, turning back to face Al-Rashid with the negotiating stance that had served her well during her most successful business years. This represents the most significant decision I've made since losing Marchetti International. Al-Rashid nodded approvingly, recognizing her need for careful consideration as a sign of the thoughtful decision-making that made her valuable as a business partner. Of course. Though I should mention that Catherine Walsh will be your primary liaison during the intelligence gathering phase, and she has extensive experience with similar acquisitions. Elena recalled her brief meeting with Walsh, noting the woman's obvious competence and professional demeanor. What's her background and how long has she been working with your organization? Catherine spent 15 years with McKinsey before joining my strategic planning team, Al-Rashid replied. She specializes in luxury retail acquisitions and has overseen successful integrations of 7 fashion brands over the past 5 years. She understands both the analytical requirements and the cultural sensitivities involved in fashion industry transactions. Elena felt reassured by Walsh's credentials, recognizing the value of working with someone who understood the unique challenges of luxury fashion business operations. Will she be involved in the post-acquisition integration as well? As much as you want her to be, Al-Rashid replied. The operational decisions will be yours to make, including staffing and organizational structure. My role will be limited to strategic oversight and resource provision. Elena appreciated the clear delineation of responsibilities, recognizing Al-Rashid's understanding that successful partnerships required defined roles and appropriate autonomy. One final question: what happens if the Meridian acquisition doesn't proceed as planned? Do our partnership arrangements survive regardless of this specific transaction? Al-Rashid's expression became more serious, indicating he understood the strategic importance of her question. The partnership agreement includes provisions for alternative opportunities if Meridian proves unsuitable for any reason. My commitment to rebuilding your fashion empire doesn't depend on any single acquisition target. Elena felt the final piece of her decision-making puzzle fall into place. Al-Rashid was offering not just participation in a specific deal, but long-term partnership in rebuilding her professional life regardless of individual transaction outcomes. I'll have an answer for you tomorrow evening, she said, extending her hand in the kind of firm handshake that concluded serious business discussions. Thank you for the opportunity and for the honesty about your organization's inadvertent role in my previous situation. Al-Rashid accepted her handshake with obvious respect, recognizing her decision-making process as evidence of the careful judgment that made her valuable as a strategic partner. Thank you for considering my proposal despite the obvious risks involved in trusting someone new after experiencing such devastating betrayal. As Elena prepared to leave the penthouse suite, she felt the weight of impending transformation settling around her like a familiar but long-forgotten garment. Tomorrow she would either accept Al-Rashid's partnership and begin the process of reclaiming her professional identity, or decline and continue building a new life based on honest but limited work. The elevator ride down to the hotel lobby gave her time to process the emotional implications of everything she had learned. Marcus Donovan's betrayal had been even more complete than she had realized, destroying her company to facilitate a deal that never materialized because honest investors refused to participate in his deception. Al-Rashid's guilt over his organization's inadvertent role in her downfall explained his generous offer, but didn't diminish the genuine business opportunity he was presenting. Walking through Manhattan toward the subway station that would take her back to Queens, Elena found herself seeing the city with new eyes. The luxury retail establishments that lined the streets weren't just reminders of her former success. They were potential components of the fashion empire she might soon rebuild under Al-Rashid's partnership. Her apartment seemed smaller that evening, not because its physical dimensions had changed, but because her horizons had suddenly expanded beyond the modest life she had been building over the past 3 years. The furniture purchased from thrift stores and the carefully budgeted meals represented not failure, but the foundation of resilience that would make her stronger in whatever came next. Elena spent the evening reviewing the partnership documents Al-Rashid had provided, analyzing each clause with the legal expertise that had protected her interests during the building of Marchetti International. The terms were indeed extraordinarily generous, providing both financial security and operational authority that addressed every concern her previous experience had identified. More importantly, the partnership structure created incentives for mutual success rather than dependency or exploitation. Al-Rashid would profit from her achievements rather than despite them, creating natural alignment of interests that made betrayal economically irrational. The decision itself had been made during their conversation, though Elena's disciplined approach to major commitments required formal analysis and overnight consideration. Al-Rashid's proposal represented everything she had lost and more, offered by someone whose resources and reputation suggested both competence and integrity. By morning, Elena knew she would accept his partnership and begin the process of intelligence gathering that would facilitate Meridian's acquisition. The 3 years of exile were ending not with gradual rehabilitation, but with immediate restoration to executive authority under circumstances that promised even greater success than she had achieved previously. Her final shift as a cleaning lady would be spent preparing for transition to executive assistant, gathering initial intelligence about Meridian's financial condition and strategic challenges while maintaining the invisibility that had protected her for 18 months. The transformation from invisible employee to strategic consultant would begin immediately, but the complete restoration of Elena Marchetti's professional identity would take months of careful execution. As she prepared for what would be her last morning of pretending to be someone she wasn't, Elena reflected on the strange circularities that life could produce. 3 years ago, she had been destroyed by someone who lacked the integrity to build his own success. Now, she was being offered redemption by someone whose success was built on recognizing and developing talent rather than exploiting it. Irony of conducting intelligence gathering against her current employer, while preparing to become its new owner, wasn't lost on Elena. But neither was the poetic justice of rebuilding her empire by acquiring the company where she had worked anonymously for 18 months. Tomorrow would bring the beginning of Elena Marchetti's return to the fashion industry, but it would also mark the end of Elena Morrison's career as an invisible cleaning lady who had learned valuable lessons about organizational dynamics and human nature. Both identities would contribute to whatever success lay ahead, creating a synthesis of executive capability and operational understanding that few business leaders ever achieved. Sheikh Khalid al-Rashid had offered her more than professional rehabilitation. He had offered her the opportunity to transform painful experience into competitive advantage, using the wisdom gained from betrayal and exile to build something stronger and more resilient than anything she had achieved before. The partnership would begin with Meridian Fashion House, but Elena knew it would extend far beyond any single acquisition to encompass the complete restoration of her life's work. In luxury fashion retail, the executive assistant position came with a corner office that offered views of Madison Avenue and access to financial systems that revealed the true depth of Meridian Fashion House's troubles. Elena sat behind her new mahogany desk, reviewing quarterly reports that painted a picture of systematic decline masked by creative accounting and deferred maintenance costs. Her transformation from cleaning lady to executive assistant had been seamless, facilitated by documentation so comprehensive that even she was impressed by the fictional Elena Morrison's credentials and employment history. Chief Financial Officer Robert Hendricks was a nervous man in his 50s who seemed perpetually overwhelmed by the mounting financial pressures facing Meridian. He had welcomed Elena's arrival with obvious relief, immediately delegating responsibilities that he lacked the bandwidth to handle effectively. Within her first week, Elena had become indispensable to his operations, managing correspondence, analyzing financial reports, and coordinating meetings with the kind of efficiency that came from years of executive experience. "Elena, I need you to prepare the monthly board presentation," Hendricks said, entering her office with the harried expression that had become his permanent feature. "Focus on the positive trends and downplay the cash flow concerns. Victoria Sterling doesn't want the board getting nervous about our liquidity position." Elena accepted the assignment while noting the instruction to manipulate financial presentations for board consumption. Such practices indicated management, desperation, and potential governance failures that would be valuable intelligence for Al-Rashid's acquisition strategy. Should I include the inventory turnover analysis in the appendix? Absolutely not. Hendricks replied quickly. Those numbers would raise questions we're not prepared to answer right now. Just stick to the revenue projections and market share data. After Hendricks left her office, Elena opened her secure laptop and began composing her daily intelligence report for Catherine Walsh. The communication protocols established by Al-Rashid's team were sophisticated, using encrypted channels and coded language that would be meaningless to anyone intercepting the messages. Her reports had been providing detailed insights into Meridian's financial condition, operational challenges, and strategic decision-making processes. Today's report would include Hendricks' instruction to manipulate board presentations, evidence of management's awareness that their financial situation was worse than publicly disclosed. Elena documented the specific metrics being hidden from board oversight, creating a comprehensive picture of institutional problems that extended beyond simple market challenges. Her phone buzzed with a text from Walsh requesting an immediate meeting at their usual location, a coffee shop 6 blocks from Meridian's headquarters that provided sufficient privacy for sensitive conversations. Elena gathered her materials and informed Hendricks that she was taking a late lunch, maintaining the routine that had allowed her to meet with Walsh twice weekly without attracting attention. The coffee shop was crowded with the usual mixture of business professionals and tourists, providing perfect cover for conversations that needed to remain unnoticed. I'm interested in understanding the full scope of what you're envisioning. Al-Rashid set down his teacup and moved to a leather portfolio that had been resting on a side table throughout their conversation. He withdrew a thick document bound in expensive paper and handed it to Elena with the kind of ceremony that suggested significant importance. This is a preliminary analysis of the luxury fashion retail sector that my team has been developing over the past 18 months. He explained as Elena began scanning the executive summary. It identifies Meridian Fashion House as one of several potential acquisition targets, but also highlights the sector's need for experienced leadership that understands both traditional luxury marketing and emerging consumer preferences. Elena absorbed the financial projections and market analysis with the focused attention that had made her legendary among business school case study writers. But she was particularly impressed by the document's sophisticated understanding of consumer psychology and brand positioning. This wasn't the work of typical financial analysts. It reflected deep knowledge of fashion industry dynamics and cultural trends. Your research team has excellent insights into the luxury consumer mindset, she observed, noting particular passages that demonstrated understanding of emotional purchasing decisions and status symbol psychology. This level of market intelligence would have been invaluable during my expansion into Asian markets. Actually, much of that analysis came from studying your expansion strategy at Marchetti International. Al-Rashid replied, his tone carrying genuine admiration. Your approach to cultural adaptation while maintaining brand integrity was revolutionary for the luxury sector. Several business schools now use your Asian market entry as a case study in successful international expansion. Elena felt a surge of pride, mixed with bitterness at the recognition of achievements that had been overshadowed by her subsequent downfall. Her Asian expansion had indeed been groundbreaking, generating over $400 million in $1 billion into Judmian groundbreaking, generating over $400 million in Dojid revenue within 3 years while establishing Marchetti International as a truly global luxury brand. That expansion also made me vulnerable to the betrayal that destroyed everything, she said quietly, acknowledging both the success and its ultimate cost. When you build something that valuable, there are always people willing to steal it rather than create their own achievements. Al-Rashid's expression darkened slightly, suggesting personal familiarity with similar betrayals or strong feelings about such injustices. Marcus Donovan's actions were reprehensible from both business and personal perspectives. What he did to you and your company violated every principle of partnership and trust. Elena looked up sharply, surprised by his detailed knowledge of her personal situation and the obvious anger in his voice when mentioning her former business partner. You seem remarkably well informed about the specifics of my downfall. May I ask why you've taken such interest in my particular situation? Al-Rashid returned to his seat, his movement carrying the kind of controlled tension that suggested the topic held personal significance beyond mere business interest. Because Marcus Donovan attempted to sell Marchetti International to my investment group without disclosing that he was betraying his business partner. When we discovered his deception, we withdrew from negotiations, but the damage to you had already been done. Elena felt the room spinning slightly as implications crashed over her like a physical force. Al-Rashid Holdings had been the mysterious Middle Eastern investment group that Marcus had secretly negotiated with, but they had pulled out when they learned about his betrayal. Her company had been destroyed not by a successful hostile takeover, but by the collapse of Marcus's deceptive scheme when honest investors refused to participate in his treachery. You knew what he was doing to me, she said, her voice barely above a whisper as she processed this revelation. You could have warned me or exposed him before he destroyed everything. By the time we understood the full scope of his deception, he had already secured voting control of your board and transferred key assets. Al-Rashid replied, his tone carrying genuine regret. Our legal team advised that any direct intervention would expose us to liability for tortious interference with business relationships. We chose to withdraw completely rather than become entangled in the situation. Elena stood and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring out at Central Park while processing this new understanding of her professional destruction. The betrayal had been even more complete than she had realized. Marcus had been using Al-Rashid's initial interest to manipulate the board and investors, creating artificial urgency around a deal that ultimately never materialized. So my company was destroyed for nothing, she said, her reflection in the window showing the pain that she had learned to hide behind professional composure. Marcus betrayed me to secure a deal that fell through because you had integrity he lacked. Yes, Al-Rashid said simply, and Elena could hear him approaching behind her. Which is why I feel a personal obligation to correct that injustice, if you're willing to accept my assistance. Elena turned to face him, studying his expression for signs of deception or manipulation, but finding only genuine remorse and determination. What exactly are you proposing? And please don't tell me this is simply business. Your emotional investment in my situation is obvious. Al-Rashid smiled ruefully, acknowledging her accurate reading of his motivations. You're right, of course. My interest in helping you rebuild your career is partially motivated by guilt over our inadvertent role in your downfall. But it's also motivated by recognition of your exceptional capabilities and my belief that talent should be rewarded, rather than destroyed by lesser people's greed. Elena returned to her seat, her mind automatically shifting into the strategic analysis mode that had served her well during years of complex negotiations. Assuming I'm interested in your proposal, what would my role be in the Meridian acquisition? And beyond? Al-Rashid opened his portfolio again, withdrawing additional documents that appeared to be detailed organizational charts and strategic planning materials. Initially, you would provide intelligence and analysis that would allow us to structure the acquisition for maximum post-purchase value creation. Your understanding of Meridian's operations, combined with your broader industry expertise, would be invaluable for developing integration strategies. Elena examined the organizational charts, noting the sophisticated understanding of corporate structure and decision-making hierarchies that the documents revealed. And after the acquisition is complete? After the acquisition, I would want you to serve as Chief Executive Officer of not just Meridian, but of a new luxury fashion division that would encompass multiple brands and international operations. Al-Rashid replied, his tone carrying the authority of someone accustomed to making decisions that affected hundreds of millions of dollars. Essentially, you would be rebuilding your fashion empire under new ownership structure. Elena felt her breath catch as the full scope of his proposal became clear. He wasn't offering her a job. He was offering her the opportunity to reclaim her life's work on an even larger scale than she had achieved with Marchetti International. What guarantees do I have that this won't end the same way as my partnership with Marcus? She asked, voicing the fear that had haunted her for 3 years. How do I know you won't betray me once I've helped you build something valuable? Al-Rashid reached into his jacket and withdrew a legal document that appeared to be professionally prepared and extensively detailed. Walsh was already seated at their regular table in the back corner, her expensive handbag and designer clothes marking her as just another well-dressed executive meeting with a colleague or client. The financial manipulation is more extensive than we initially realized, Elena said quietly, sliding into the seat across from Walsh and opening her tablet to display the morning's discoveries. Hendricks is actively concealing inventory problems and cash flow issues from board oversight. Walsh studied the financial data with the practiced attention of someone who had analyzed dozens of similar situations during her consulting career. This suggests management knows they're facing insolvency within the next 6 to 9 months unless they find external capital or dramatically reduce operating expenses. Elena nodded, confirming Walsh's analysis with additional evidence she had gathered during her access to Meridian's financial systems. Sterling is preparing for either acquisition or bankruptcy. The staff reduction plans are more aggressive than what's been disclosed to employees, and they're already negotiating with creditors about extended payment terms. Perfect, Walsh said, making notes on her own tablet while maintaining the appearance of a routine business lunch. This intelligence confirms our timeline and provides leverage for negotiating favorable acquisition terms. Sterling will be motivated to accept offers that might otherwise seem inadequate. Elena felt the familiar thrill of strategic planning that had driven her success during the building of Marchetti International, but tempered by awareness that she was actively working to facilitate the acquisition of her current employer. The ethical implications were complex, though she justified her actions by recognizing that Meridian's employees would be better served by Al-Rashid's ownership than by Sterling's mismanagement. There's something else, Elena said, lowering her voice further as she prepared to share information that could dramatically affect the acquisition timeline. Sterling received a call yesterday from investment bankers representing another potential acquirer. She scheduled meetings for next week to explore competitive bids. Walsh's expression sharpened immediately, recognizing the strategic implications of competitive interest in Meridian. Did you identify the other potential acquirer? European luxury conglomerate, probably based in France or Italy, Elena replied, drawing on her knowledge of the industry's major players. The conversation suggested they're looking for American market access and have significant capital available for acquisitions. Walsh was already composing messages on her phone, likely alerting Al-Rashid's team to the competitive threat that could complicate their acquisition strategy. This changes our timeline considerably. We may need to accelerate the formal offer to prevent a bidding war. Elena understood the implications immediately. Competitive bidding would drive up Meridian's acquisition price, while potentially creating opportunities for Sterling to negotiate better terms for existing management. Al-Rashid's generous partnership offer to Elena might become less attractive if he faced significant competition for the target company. What do you need from me to support an accelerated timeline? Elena asked, recognizing that her role would become more critical if the acquisition process moved faster than originally planned. Complete financial records, supplier contracts, and employee agreements, Walsh replied, consulting her notes to prioritize intelligence-gathering requirements. We need enough information to submit a comprehensive offer without extended due diligence periods. That would give competitors time to develop their own proposals. Elena calculated the challenges involved in accessing such comprehensive information, while maintaining her cover as an executive assistant. Some documents would be available through her legitimate access to Hendricks' files, but others would require more creative approaches that increased her risk of exposure. The supplier contracts are stored in Sterling's office safe, Elena said, sharing information she had gathered during her weeks of careful observation. Employee agreements are maintained by Human Resources in a separate secure system that I don't currently have access to. Walsh nodded, understanding the operational challenges while maintaining focus on strategic requirements. Can you arrange legitimate access to the Human Resources systems? Maybe through a special project or audit assignment. Elena considered the possibilities, drawing on her understanding of Meridian's organizational dynamics and Hendricks' willingness to delegate complex tasks. I could propose conducting an employment cost analysis to support the board presentation. That would require reviewing employee agreements to calculate benefit obligations and compensation trends. Excellent, Walsh agreed, recognizing the strategic value of Elena's insider knowledge about organizational behavior and management priorities. What about Sterling's office safe? Elena had been anticipating this question since discovering the supplier contract's location during a meeting in Sterling's office the previous week. That would require after-hours access and knowledge of the combination, both of which represent significant risks if I'm discovered. Walsh's expression became more serious, acknowledging the potential consequences of detection while balancing them against the intelligence value of the supplier contracts. The contracts are critical for understanding Meridian's cost structure and identifying post-acquisition optimization opportunities. Can you determine the safe combination without alerting Sterling to your interest? Elena felt the familiar weight of operational risk assessment that had been part of her executive responsibilities during complex international business negotiations. Sterling's assistant might have access to the combination for legitimate business purposes. I could approach her about coordinating a special project that requires after-hours document access. Do it, Walsh said, though her tone carried acknowledgement of the increased risk Elena would be accepting. But establish clear fallback positions if the approach fails or raises suspicions about your motivations. As their meeting concluded, Elena felt the acceleration of events that preceded major business transactions. The competitive threat had transformed their intelligence gathering from careful, methodical research into urgent information acquisition that required more aggressive approaches and greater personal risk. Walking back to Meridian's headquarters, Elena reflected on how completely her life had changed in just 2 weeks. The anonymous cleaning lady had become a strategic consultant conducting corporate espionage against her employer while preparing for a partnership that would restore her professional identity and financial security. That afternoon brought unexpected complications when Victoria Sterling summoned Elena to her office for a meeting that hadn't been scheduled through normal channels. Sterling's corner office was a monument to aggressive success, filled with awards, photographs with celebrities and politicians, and furniture that proclaimed both wealth and power. "Elena, sit down," Sterling said, her tone carrying the kind of authority that had built Meridian into a recognizable luxury brand despite its current financial challenges. "Robert speaks very highly of your work over the past 2 weeks. Says you've been invaluable in managing the increased reporting requirements." Elena accepted the compliment while noting Sterling's penetrating gaze and the careful way she was being evaluated. "Thank you, Ms. Sterling. I'm grateful for the opportunity to contribute to Meridian's success." "Your background is interesting," Sterling continued, consulting what appeared to be a personnel file on her desk. "Advanced degree in business administration, extensive Experience in financial analysis, yet you were working in our cleaning services until recently. That's an unusual career trajectory. Elena felt the careful scrutiny and recognized the beginning of questions that could expose her true identity. If not handled skillfully, the past few years have been challenging personally. Sometimes life requires accepting whatever work is available while rebuilding professional opportunities. Sterling nodded as if accepting this explanation, but her continued attention suggested she wasn't entirely satisfied with Elena's response. Robert mentioned that you've been particularly helpful with financial analysis and strategic planning tasks. Those skills suggest capabilities beyond typical administrative support. Elena realized she was being tested, evaluated for competencies. That might have attracted Sterling's attention through the quality of her work for Hendricks. Her business expertise was becoming too visible, threatening the anonymity that protected her intelligence-gathering activities. I've always been interested in business strategy, Elena replied carefully. Working in different positions at Meridian has given me perspective on how various departments contribute to overall company performance. Sterling leaned back in her chair, her expression shifting from evaluation to calculation as she processed Elena's responses. I have a proposition. For you, we're facing some challenging strategic decisions that require analysis beyond our current capabilities. Would you be interested in a temporary assignment that would involve more complex responsibilities? Elena recognized both opportunity and danger in Sterling's offer. Increased responsibilities would provide greater access to sensitive information, but also more visibility that could expose her true identity or intelligence-gathering activities. What kind of strategic decisions? Potential partnership opportunities that could provide capital for expansion or operational improvements, Sterling replied, using language that clearly referred to acquisition discussions without explicitly acknowledging them. The analysis would require reviewing confidential financial information and preparing presentations for senior management consideration. Elena understood that Sterling was offering her access to the exact information that Walsh needed for Al-Rashid's acquisition strategy, but under circumstances that would make her intelligence-gathering activities more visible and risky. I would be very interested in that opportunity. Sterling smiled, an expression that carried satisfaction at Elena's response, but also suggested she was implementing a plan that extended beyond simple task assignment. Excellent. The work would begin immediately and require complete discretion. We're dealing with sensitive information that could affect stock prices and competitive positioning. As Elena left Sterling's office with authorization to access Meridian's most confidential strategic planning documents, she realized the ethical complexity of her situation had increased dramatically. She was now being trusted by her target companies. Leadership to analyze the same acquisition opportunities she was secretly facilitating for their potential acquirer. That evening, Elena met Walsh at a different location, a wine bar in Soho that provided more privacy than their usual coffee shop meetings. The change of venue reflected the increased sensitivity of information they needed to discuss and the growing complexity of Elena's position within Meridian's organization. Sterling's offer changes everything, Walsh said, reviewing Elena's account of the afternoon meeting with obvious concern. She's either testing you for loyalty or she suspects your true identity. Elena had been considering the same possibilities during her subway ride from Manhattan to their meeting location. My work for Hendricks has been too competent for someone with Elena Morrison's supposed background. Sterling recognizes capabilities that don't match my official credentials, which creates both opportunity and significant risk, Walsh replied, acknowledging the strategic implications while recognizing the personal danger Elena now faced. You'll have access to exactly the information we need, but under circumstances that make detection much more likely. Elena sipped her wine while processing the operational challenges that Sterling's assignment created. There's another possibility we haven't considered. Sterling might be planning to use me as a double agent, feeding me false information to mislead potential acquirers. Walsh's expression became more focused as she considered this strategic complication. That would require her to suspect Al-Rashid's interests specifically, not just general acquisition activity. Do you think she has that level of intelligence about our intentions? Elena reviewed everything she had observed about Sterling's information, sources and strategic awareness during her weeks working at Meridian. She's more sophisticated than most of her employees realize. The competitive bid she's exploring might be designed to flush out other interested parties rather than generate genuine alternatives. If that's true, then your intelligence gathering becomes even more critical, Walsh said, recognizing the increased stakes involved in their operation. We need to determine Sterling's true strategic intentions before Al-Rashid commits to a formal offer. Elena felt the familiar pressure of high-stakes business. Negotiations where incomplete information and strategic deception created opportunities for devastating mistakes. I'll need to approach the special assignment carefully, gathering information while avoiding exposure of my real motivations. Walsh nodded, understanding the delicate balance Elena would need to maintain between fulfilling Sterling's expectations and continuing her intelligence gathering for Al-Rashid. What additional support do you need from our end? Elena considered the resources that would help her navigate the increasingly complex situation while maintaining operational security. I need detailed background on the European luxury conglomerate that contacted Sterling. If they're legitimate competitors, I need to understand their strategy and capabilities. If they're part of Sterling's deception, I need to identify the connections. Done, Walsh agreed, making notes on her phone to coordinate the necessary research. What else? Technical support for accessing Sterling's office safe, Elena said, acknowledging the increased importance of the supplier contracts now that she had legitimate access to Sterling's strategic planning. The information is too valuable to ignore, but the risks require professional expertise. Walsh's expression became more serious as she considered the implications of Elena's request. That crosses the line from intelligence gathering into active espionage. Are you prepared for the potential consequences if you're detected? Elena had been asking herself the same question since accepting Al-Rashid's partnership offer and beginning her transformation from invisible employee to strategic operative. I'm prepared for whatever consequences come from helping someone who gave me back my professional life after others destroyed it. Then we'll provide the technical support, Walsh said, recognizing Elena's commitment while acknowledging the increased risk they were all accepting. But we'll also prepare contingency plans for extraction if your position becomes untenable. As their meeting concluded, Elena felt the weight of escalating commitments and increasing danger that accompanied high-stakes business operations. She was no longer simply gathering intelligence about a potential acquisition target. She was actively working to facilitate the purchase of her employer while serving as Sterling's strategic analyst for the same transaction. The next morning brought Elena's first assignment from Sterling, a comprehensive analysis of Meridian's financial position and strategic options that would be presented to the board of directors within 1 week. The irony of preparing materials that would help Sterling evaluate Al-Rashid's eventual offer while simultaneously providing intelligence that would help Al-Rashid structure that offer wasn't lost on Elena. Sterling's confidence in Elena's analytical capabilities was evident in the scope and complexity of the assignment, which included access to financial records, strategic planning documents, and board meeting materials that most employees would never see. Elena realized that Sterling was either demonstrating extraordinary trust or conducting an elaborate test of her loyalty and competence. Working through the financial records revealed the full extent of Meridian's challenges, from declining sales and increasing costs to supplier relationship problems and inventory management failures. The company's problems were systemic rather than temporary. requiring either massive capital investment or fundamental restructuring to achieve sustainable profitability. Elena's analysis also confirmed that Sterling was indeed exploring multiple strategic options, from partnership agreements and capital infusions to complete acquisition by companies with complementary capabilities. The European luxury conglomerate was just one of several potential partners Sterling was evaluating, suggesting a more sophisticated strategic process than Elena had initially realized. By midweek, Elena had compiled a comprehensive assessment of Meridian's situation that would be invaluable for both Sterling's strategic planning and Al-Rashid's acquisition strategy. The dual nature of her role required careful management of information flow, ensuring that neither party received intelligence that would compromise her position with the other. Thursday evening brought an unexpected development when Elena received a phone call from an unknown number that displayed international calling codes. The voice that answered her cautious greeting was cultured, speaking English with a slight accent that she couldn't immediately identify. "Miss Morrison, this is Philippe Dubois from Luke's European Group," the caller said, using her assumed identity while introducing himself as a representative of the European conglomerate that had contacted Sterling. "I understand you're assisting with strategic analysis at Meridian Fashion House." Elena felt a chill of recognition mixed with confusion as she realized her assumed identity had been penetrated by people who shouldn't have known about her role in Sterling's strategic planning. "I'm sorry, but I don't think we've been introduced. How did you obtain my contact information?" "We have mutual acquaintances in the luxury fashion industry," Dubois replied, his tone carrying implications that extended beyond casual business. "Networking. I was hoping we might arrange a meeting to discuss matters of mutual interest regarding Meridian's future strategic direction." Elena understood immediately that she was being approached by Sterling's potential competing bidder, either as part of their due diligence process or as an attempt to gather intelligence about Al-Rashid's interest in the company. The approach represented both opportunity and extreme danger, as any meeting could expose her true identity or compromise her intelligence-gathering activities. "I appreciate your interest, but my work for Meridian involves confidential strategic planning that wouldn't be appropriate to discuss with outside parties," Elena replied, maintaining professional boundaries while trying to determine Dubois's true intentions. "Of course," Dubois agreed smoothly. "Though I should mention that our research into the luxury fashion sector has identified several talented executives whose careers were, unfortunately, interrupted by circumstances beyond their control. Sometimes new opportunities arise that allow such individuals to reclaim their professional standing." Elena felt her blood turn cold as she realized Dubois was making veiled references to her true identity and professional history. Someone had connected Elena Morrison with Elena Marchetti, potentially exposing both her intelligence-gathering activities and her partnership with Al-Rashid. "I think there may be some confusion about my background," Elena said carefully though. Her tone carried less certainty than her words suggested. "I'm simply an administrative employee helping with routine business analysis." "Perhaps," Dubois replied, his tone suggesting he wasn't convinced by her denial. "Though if circumstances were to change, and you found yourself interested in discussing alternative opportunities, I can be reached at this number at any time." After ending the call, Elena immediately contacted Walsh using their emergency communication protocols, transmitting a brief coded message that indicated potential compromise of operational security. The response came within minutes, directing her to an immediate meeting at a secure location in Midtown Manhattan. Walsh was waiting in the lobby of a luxury hotel, her expression carrying the focused concern of someone dealing with a significant operational crisis. They proceeded to a private conference room that Walsh had reserved under a false name, providing complete privacy for discussions that could determine the future of their entire operation. "Dubois represents Luke's European Group, but our research indicates they're backed by interests that extend beyond simple business acquisition," Walsh said, consulting her tablet to review intelligence reports that had been compiled since Elena's emergency communication. There are connections to individuals who have personal reasons for opposing al-Rashid's business activities. Elena felt the implications settling over her like a physical weight as she realized the competitive bidding for Meridian might be motivated by factors beyond normal business strategy. Someone is using the acquisition as an opportunity to target al-Rashid through me. It appears so, Walsh confirmed, her tone carrying genuine concern for Elena's safety rather than just operational considerations. Which means your cover identity has been compromised and your continued presence at Meridian represents significant personal risk. Elena considered the implications of withdrawing from her intelligence-gathering activities just as they were. Providing access to the most valuable information about Meridian's strategic planning. What are my options? Walsh consulted additional documents, reviewing contingency plans that had been prepared for exactly this type of operational compromise. We can extract you immediately and complete the acquisition based on intelligence already gathered, or we can provide additional security support while you complete Sterling's strategic analysis assignment. Elena realized she was facing the same type of high-stakes decision that had defined her career building Marchetti International, weighing potential rewards against significant personal risks while operating with incomplete information about her opponent's capabilities and intentions. How much additional intelligence would we gain from completing Sterling's assignment? She asked, focusing on strategic value rather than personal safety considerations. Potentially decisive information about Meridian's true financial position and Sterling's negotiating strategy, Walsh replied honestly. But the risks of continued exposure are substantial, particularly if Dubois represents hostile interests rather than simple competitors. Elena made her decision with the same calculated courage that had driven her success during her most challenging business negotiations. I'll complete Sterling's assignment, but I want full security support and extraction plans if the situation becomes untenable. Walsh nodded, recognizing Elena's commitment while acknowledging the increased resources that would be required to protect her during the final phase of their intelligence-gathering operation. Done, but Elena, if Dubois or anyone else makes direct contact again, you extract immediately regardless of what intelligence might be lost. As they prepared to leave the hotel conference room, Elena reflected on how completely her life had changed since accepting al-Rashid's partnership offer 3 weeks earlier. She was no longer the anonymous cleaning lady observing corporate dysfunction from invisibility, but a strategic operative conducting espionage while navigating threats from multiple directions. The final week of Sterling's strategic analysis assignment would determine whether al-Rashid's acquisition of Meridian proceeded successfully or whether Elena's exposure would compromise both the business transaction and her personal safety. Either way, her 3-year exile from the fashion industry was ending in circumstances more dramatic and dangerous than anything she had experienced during her previous executive career. The boardroom fell silent as Elena finished presenting her strategic analysis to Meridian's directors, but Victoria Sterling's expression suggested triumph rather than concern about the dire financial projections. Elena had delivered exactly what Sterling wanted, a comprehensive case for immediate acquisition that would justify accepting whatever offer emerged from the competitive bidding process. "Thank you, Elena," Sterling said, dismissing her from the executive session where board members would discuss the private offers that had been submitted that morning. "Your analysis has been invaluable in helping us understand our position." Elena gathered her materials and left the boardroom, but lingered in the adjacent hallway where she could monitor the continuing discussions through the partially open door. Her weeks of intelligence gathering had led to this moment when al-Rashid's offer would compete directly against the mysterious European consortium that had targeted her personally. "The al-Rashid proposal is significantly higher," she heard board member David Chun saying, his voice carrying obvious satisfaction with the financial terms. 2.4 billion compared to the European group's 1.8 billion. But the European offer includes guaranteed management retention. Sterling replied, her tone suggesting personal priorities beyond simple financial maximization. Al-Rashid's proposal mentions potential organizational restructuring that could affect current leadership. Elena felt a surge of vindication as she realized Sterling's preference for the lower offer was motivated by self-preservation rather than shareholder value. The board discussion confirmed that Al-Rashid's generous bid had created exactly the competitive pressure needed to force a decision. Her phone buzzed with an urgent text from Catherine Walsh requesting immediate contact. Through secure channels, Elena moved to an empty conference room and activated the encrypted communication system that would allow real-time coordination with Al-Rashid's team. The board is deliberating now, Elena reported quietly. Al-Rashid's offer is significantly higher, but Sterling is advocating for the European consortium based on management retention guarantees. Perfect, Walsh replied, her voice carrying satisfaction with how events were unfolding. Sheikh Al-Rashid anticipated Sterling's self-interest and prepared a response that should resolve the situation definitively. Elena heard footsteps approaching the conference room and quickly ended her communication with Walsh. James Patterson appeared in the doorway, his expression carrying the kind of urgency that preceded major announcements. Elena, Sterling wants to see you in her office immediately, Patterson said. Something about your background research and the acquisition discussions. Elena felt a chill of apprehension as she realized Sterling had somehow connected her intelligence-gathering activities to the competitive bidding process. The timing suggested either spectacular bad luck or deliberate exposure by someone who wanted to compromise her position. Sterling's office was crowded with people Elena didn't recognize, including a man whose bearing and expensive clothes marked him as Philippe Dubois, the European representative who had contacted her earlier. The presence of multiple unknown individuals suggested a confrontation that extended beyond simple business negotiations. Elena, please sit down, Sterling said, her tone carrying authority mixed with something that might have been satisfaction. These gentlemen have some interesting information about your background that I think we should discuss. Dubois stepped forward with a tablet displaying what appeared to be financial records and legal documents from Elena's previous business career. Ms. Elena Marchetti, former CEO of Marchetti International, current strategic consultant to Sheikh, Khalid Al-Rashid's acquisition team. Elena realized that maintaining her assumed identity was no longer possible, but she also recognized that her exposure might create opportunities rather than just dangers. Those allegations are quite serious, Mr. Dubois. I hope you have evidence to support them. Substantial evidence, Dubois replied, displaying photographs and documentation that proved her true identity beyond any reasonable doubt, including records of your meetings with Catherine Walsh and your transmission of confidential Meridian information to Al-Rashid's intelligence team. Sterling leaned back in her chair, her expression carrying vindication rather than anger. Elena, I've suspected your true capabilities since your first week as my strategic analyst. Your expertise was far too sophisticated for someone with Elena Morrison's supposed background. Elena felt the careful facade of the past month dissolving completely, but also experienced relief at no longer needing to maintain deceptions that had become increasingly difficult to sustain. What exactly are you proposing, Ms. Sterling? A partnership, Sterling replied, surprising Elena with an offer rather than accusations or threats. Dubois represents investors who are prepared to make a counteroffer that would retain current management while providing the capital Meridian needs for expansion. Elena realized she was being recruited by Sterling and Dubois to betray Al-Rashid's acquisition in exchange for a position with the competing consortium. The offer represented professional opportunity, but would require abandoning her partnership with the man who had offered her genuine redemption. What kind of partnership? Elena asked, buying time while calculating strategic options and potential consequences. Dubois consulted his tablet, bringing up what appeared to be detailed employment agreements and financial packages. Executive Vice President of Strategic Development, equity participation in the acquired company, and guaranteed autonomy over luxury brand expansion into American markets. The terms were generous, potentially providing Elena with the executive authority and financial security she had been seeking since her partnership with Al-Rashid began. But accepting would mean betraying someone who had demonstrated genuine commitment to correcting the injustices she had suffered. "This is quite unexpected," Elena said carefully, recognizing that her response would determine not just her immediate future, but her fundamental character as a business leader and human being. "May I ask why you're interested in someone whose previous company was destroyed by betrayal and poor judgment?" Sterling smiled, an expression that suggested she understood Elena's situation better than anyone else in the room. "Because Elena Marchetti built something extraordinary before being betrayed by someone she trusted. And because betrayal teaches lessons about loyalty and competence that can't be learned any other way." Elena felt the weight of decision settling around her like a familiar burden, recognizing the moment when personal values would determine professional outcomes, regardless of financial considerations or strategic advantages. "I appreciate your offer," she said, standing to signal the end of negotiations rather than their continuation. "But I've already committed to a partnership with someone who offered me redemption when I had nothing to give in return." Dubois's expression darkened as he realized Elena was declining their offer despite its obvious advantages. "Miss Marchetti, I should warn you that refusing our partnership could have consequences that extend beyond simple career considerations." Elena recognized the threat for what it was, but also felt the clarity that came from making decisions based on principle rather than fear. "Mr. Dubois, I spent 3 years learning that some things matter more than career advancement or financial security. Loyalty to people who demonstrate integrity is one of those things." Sterling's expression shifted from confidence to calculation, as she realized Elena couldn't be recruited through either generous offers or subtle threats. "Elena, you're making a mistake that could cost you everything you've worked to rebuild." "Perhaps," Elena agreed, moving toward the office door with the composed dignity that had sustained her through 3 years of exile and humiliation. "But some mistakes are worth making when the alternative is betraying people who trusted you with their friendship and partnership." As Elena left Sterling's office, she immediately contacted Walsh using emergency protocols that would alert Al-Rashid's entire team to the compromise of their intelligence operation. The response was immediate, directing her to an extraction point where security personnel would ensure her safe removal from any further threats. The extraction team met Elena 6 blocks from Meridian's headquarters, professional security specialists who moved her to a safe location where Al-Rashid was waiting with obvious concern for her welfare rather than just operational considerations. "Elena, I'm sorry your position was compromised," Al-Rashid said as she entered the secure conference room where their partnership had begun weeks earlier. "Catherine briefed me on Sterling's recruitment attempt and Dubois's threats." Elena felt exhausted by the emotional intensity of the confrontation, but also strangely exhilarated by having passed a test of character that defined who she truly was beneath the professional titles and financial arrangements. "The intelligence gathering is complete," she reported, focusing on business matters rather than personal feelings. "Sterling will recommend the European consortium despite your higher offer, but the board will likely override her preference based on fiduciary obligations to shareholders." Al-Rashid nodded, acknowledging the strategic information while maintaining focus on Elena's immediate safety. "The acquisition will proceed regardless of Sterling's preferences. What matters now is ensuring your protection from whatever consequences Dubois might attempt to implement." Elena realized that Al-Rashid's concern for her welfare demonstrated the character that had made her partnership offer trustworthy in the first place. What happens next? Next, we complete the Meridian acquisition and begin building the luxury fashion empire we discussed. Al-Rashid replied with the quiet confidence of someone whose resources made such statements credible rather than aspirational. Your performance during this operation confirmed every assessment of your capabilities and character. 3 months later, Elena stood in the renovated executive offices of Meridian Fashion House, now operating as the flagship division of Al-Rashid Luxury Group under her leadership as Chief Executive Officer. The transformation had been swift and comprehensive, with capital investment and strategic restructuring that had restored the company's financial stability while expanding its market reach. Victoria Sterling had accepted a generous severance package that included confidentiality agreements, preventing her from discussing the acquisition process or Elena's role in facilitating it. The European consortium's competing bid had been withdrawn after regulatory authorities raised questions about the source of their financing and their connections to questionable business practices. Elena's office overlooked Madison Avenue with views that reminded her daily of how dramatically her circumstances had changed since cleaning these same floors 18 months earlier. The executive team she had assembled combined experienced fashion industry professionals with young talent who brought fresh perspectives to luxury brand management. The success of Meridian's transformation under Al-Rashid's ownership had attracted attention from other struggling luxury brands, whose owners were interested in similar partnerships. Elena's calendar was filled with acquisition discussions and strategic planning meetings that would expand their fashion empire across multiple brands and international markets. But the most satisfying moments came during her weekly meetings with Sheikh Khalid al-Rashid, who had proven to be exactly the partner he had promised to be during their initial negotiations. Their collaboration was based on mutual respect and aligned interests rather than dependency or exploitation, creating the kind of professional relationship Elena had thought impossible after her betrayal by Marcus Donovan. The Milan expansion is ahead of schedule, Elena reported during their latest strategic review, noting the irony of rebuilding her international presence in the same city where her previous empire had been destroyed. European revenues should exceed projections by 15% this quarter. Al-Rashid smiled with obvious satisfaction at their shared success, but his expression also carried personal pride in Elena's achievements rather than just financial returns. Your expansion strategy demonstrates the same innovative thinking that made Marchetti International legendary in the fashion industry. Elena felt a surge of professional fulfillment that had been absent during her 3 years of exile, recognizing that her current success was built on foundations stronger than anything she had achieved previously. The lessons learned from betrayal and hardship had created wisdom that enhanced rather than diminished her executive capabilities. As their meeting concluded and Elena prepared for the afternoon's board presentation about their next acquisition target, she reflected on the unexpected paths that had led from cleaning offices to rebuilding her fashion empire under circumstances more favorable than she had ever imagined possible. The woman they had once dismissed as too beautiful for serious business had proven that appearances could indeed be deceiving, but her greatest deception had been convincing herself that survival was sufficient when she was capable of so much more. Sheikh Khalid al-Rashid had offered her the opportunity to reclaim not just her professional identity, but her fundamental belief in the possibility of justice and redemption. Elena Marchetti was no longer the betrayed exile who had lost everything to someone else's greed and deception. She was the chief executive officer of a growing luxury fashion empire, the partner of one of the world's most successful investors, and proof that talent and integrity could overcome even the most devastating setbacks when supported by people who recognized value beyond immediate appearances. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.